That's where those kids went missing a while back. Well, 20-year-olds. Everyone sees him go into one of the rooms. Nobody sees them leave. Some folks been trying to move in there for at least the past decade, but most leave not long after. Seen the police there a few times. If I were you, I would unload it to the next sucker and get out. It's cheap for a reason. But that man knew I didn't have it in me to just walk away based on rumors. I hired a group outside of the state to install 16 doors at a premium, including pantry, closet, and pull doors to the attic. They estimated 2 weeks, the universal standard for all remolding jobs. I got a call from the on-site super brand 2 days later to tell me he and his crew are pulling out and issuing a credit without legitimate reason. They sounded spooked and only said they refused to go into the back room without legitimate reason. I raced back to the house hoping to catch them still there to ask what was going on. I was happy to see their work truck still here, but the men were not in the house. I decided to check the back room to see what was wrong with it. The back room was the only one near the back door, a strange offshoot that had its own bathroom, a washer and dryer, and 2 couches crowded with old rag dolls that the former owners left. The men hadn't installed any doors except for the front and back doors, and ones on the back room. The only thing out of place in the back room, other than the creepy rag dolls, was Brand's cell phone, still open with only 4% life left. Enough for me to see it had tried to make 350 calls in 2 hours. They recorded 15 minutes of videos broken up into 2 to 3 minute segments. I watched the longest of the videos first. It was shaky hand camera video that showed my back room door opening to my hallway, but a little different. The wall lights were in the wrong spot. Brand opened and shut the back room door again to show a completely different room, the upstairs bathroom, before coming to the hallway again. Someone asked something in Spanish and the cameraman answered, "Yeah, the rooms are different each time we shut the door. I'm just getting the video of this craziest thing ever." They walked to the front door and cameraman told a worker to abra la puerta, and one of them opened the door. The video showed the front door opening to the back room. They laughed, shut the front door, and opened it again. It was still the back room. Brand returned to the back room and opened that door, and saw that it now opened to the guest bedroom. Their laughs were weakened with fear. The video bobbed wildly as they ran to the back door and opened it to find the front room. One of the workers yelled "Ventanas," and the cameraman looked up at the windows. They no longer showed the outside, but other portions of the house. They were breathing hard, nearly hyperventilating now. They ran through the front door and into a kitchen and through the den, all in a line when they shouldn't have been. They finally arrived to the back room, but all of the rag dolls were gone from the couch. The men off screen gasped, and the cameraman murmured, "Oh my God." As the camera was about to point at what they were looking at, the phone died. I looked up from the black screen to see the door to the back room slowly shut on its own. My fingers were able to slip in just in time before the door closed. I swear I could feel the house trying to force the door closed, but I forced more. The front door was also closing on its own. By design of malicious intent, I can't say, but it was closing fast. I swear I saw a corner of my own bedroom starting to form outside before my foot kicked the door outward to the real world. Now there are no doors on my house. There are no doors on my new house. When I heard that there are homes in Michigan that you can buy for $3,000, I knew I had to have one. What I found were homes that had been stripped to bare shells and homes with trees growing out of their tops. That's why when I found a place on a decent drive in relatively okay condition, I was thrilled that all the house was missing were the doors. The 4-bedroom, 3-bath house was amazing compared to what I had seen. Running water, working electrical, nice hardwood floors, no mold, no rot. Someone must have taken all the doors very recently, even the front and back ones, and nothing else. Not even the copper handles and taps. I waited for the real estate agency to send someone out for the official show. I was expecting someone in a real estate-owned, graphic-wrapped car and a friendly smile. What I got was the world's most filthy van, driven by the world's sketchiest, skeeziest, and skitziest driver, creaking to a stop right in front of me. A woman rushed up from within and pushed her face against the glass of the van's side windows. It was hard to hear her, but I think she said, "Over there all the time." And they said they lost a man, and Johnny never lost a man because Johnny went to war and brought men back. But they looked, and they lost that man. They looked up and down, and they couldn't find him, and they knew he was there. But he wasn't because he put doors up. Same as Sam, she went into one. And I tried to dismiss this crazy lady with a small wave. All right, thank you, ma'am. Have a nice day. Doors! Johnny went into the back room to talk to Lori, who went through the kitchen to get to the room. Both lost, and Johnny never lost anyone. The doors! The driver seemed to panic and took off with a screech as a new real estate-owned graphic-wrapped car pulled to a stop with the paperwork and deed to the house. I didn't let one old burnout's bad trip story scare me. The area was cheap enough for me to rent a room in for a bit, while I arranged for a contractor to come and put the doors on. All of the well-established and more reputable firms in the area wouldn't even stay on the phone as soon as I said my address. One was kind enough to laugh and stay on long enough to ask, "You must be from outstate hearing about one of those cheap houses, eh?" Story 2. My first night in alone in my new house didn't go so well. We just built our house, Will and I. Last month we were able to move in. It's small, not even 1,000 square feet. His parents call it a micro home. I call it perfect. It's just us and our 2 dogs. Well, 3 now, but I'll talk about that in a minute. First, I should explain a few things so this story makes more sense. I've lived most of my life here in Colorado. I was born and raised in Denver. I took a hiatus when I went to college out of state, but I came back. It's home. Our new house is just east of the Front Range and south of Denver. We're pretty far out of the city. It takes 30 minutes or so to reach the city limits of Denver. Our nearest and pretty much only neighbor, Steve, is just over half a mile away, which isn't really all that far. I can see his house from here as I type this. He's also my best friend and has been since high school. It's really an awesome setup for Will and I, and we love it. But last night didn't go so well. Will is out of town for work for 4 days, leaving me and the dogs alone in the new place for the first time. It didn't occur to me to be bothered by this, since I've spent plenty of nights alone before. The day was as normal as could be. I drove Will to the airport without any trouble, came home, took the dogs for a stroll around the property, got some work done. I talked to Will on Skype for a while, made dinner, and retired to the deck out back afterwards. I was sitting in a chair, enjoying the cool air, minding my own business. Down the road a bit, I could see the lights on in Steve's house. Not a thing seemed to be out of the ordinary. I was so enjoying the night air that I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment, took in the smells and sounds of nature around me, and that's when one of the dogs growled. The sound made me sit up so fast I almost fell out of my chair. I studied the 3 dogs and figured out pretty quickly that it was Big Ben who had made the noise. Ears alert, he was staring off into the night with keen eyes. The 2 girls were equally alert, although they didn't seem to have heard or seen what he had. The look to him while he continued to gaze toward the dark yard. He gave another low, almost inaudible growl. Now there's certain sounds that dogs make that really put you on alert. This was one of them. It was an unsure, almost hesitant growl. Like something was spooking him, but he didn't know exactly what. I followed his gaze, but nothing within the confines of the fenced-in backyard seemed amiss. Unless there was an animal just beyond the wooden fence, as far as I could tell, there was nothing at all for him to be growling about. I watched him for a minute, and he kept looking in the same place. He'd sniff the air, and his ears would swivel, as though something just beyond his ability to sense was out there. I started to feel a little creeped out, but the other 2 dogs, Danny and Nina, didn't seem to be picking up on anything. I studied him for a few more minutes and finally convinced myself he was either overreacting about something or imagining things. So Big Ben is our newest addition. He showed up a few weeks before the house was finished, just out of the blue one day, while I was checking on the progress of things. He's a massive, shaggy black bear of a dog. Although he appeared to be a stray, he had come right up to me, tail wagging, and greeted me as though he'd been my dog all his life. Who could turn him away? We took him in immediately. The vet we took him to found no microchip, and no one around had heard of a missing dog, so we kept him. Will was the one who named him, and a fitting name it is. He's 100 pounds and his shoulder almost comes up to my hip. I'm convinced he's got wolf in him. He's been like an oversized puppy from day one, never aggressive and as obedient and loyal as our girls. But at times I have some trouble figuring him out. Sometimes he does weird things, growls at nothing, stops dead in his tracks like he hears something, or stares into the distance like he thinks he sees something. At the end of the day, we have no idea what his life was like before us. It was possible was on his own for months. The vet thinks he's about 3. His heightened sense of awareness could just be from being on his own for so long, having to look out for himself. Nonetheless, I felt a distinct shift in the atmosphere as a result of him growling into the darkness. I was genuinely uneasy, and for the first time since Will had left, was fully appreciating the fact that aside from my trio of dogs, I was alone. My eyes involuntarily drifted towards Steve's house. The light from within gave me a sense of comfort. Knowing I could pick up the phone and have him at the door in minutes calmed me down some. But I wasn't about to bother him over this. I was going to head back in for the night when I looked towards the black shadow of the mountains. And then I heard it. It was a very faint, almost indiscernible sound coming from the woods. A pattering sound, like something walking on the forest floor. It was so faint that I wasn't even sure if I was hearing it or my ears were playing tricks on me. It could have been the light breeze rustling the leaves. And then a light wind came up, and I swear the moment it did, I heard what sounded like someone saying, "Shh." That freaked me out, but when I strained to listen, it was hard to distinguish the sounds of the wind in the leaves from anything else. I thought I imagined it. The dark was making me freak myself out. The sound of faint footfalls continued. It went on for a few minutes before it was so faint I couldn't tell if it was wind or not. I shrugged it off. There's deer back there, and stray cats, and probably other animals I never even see. There was no reason to worry about it, but it still sufficiently creeped me out. So I went back inside. I watched Netflix, yay Peaky Blinders, for a bit, but got sleepy. By 11 I was in bed, and it didn't take long for me to fall asleep. But I didn't stay asleep. Every night a different person walks down the street and screams for help. We aren't allowed to help them. Series looking back, I feel dumb. Completely stupid, actually. I should have known that apartment was far too cheap to be right, even for a studio. I should have known there had to be a catch. The day I moved in was a complete blur. I insisted that no one help me, not wanting to prove any of my family members' suspicions about my character. By late afternoon, all my muscles ached terribly and my head throbbed. I fell back on my bare mattress, staring up at the ceiling fan with glazed over eyes. I pulled the damp strands of hair from my sweaty forehead, wincing in disgust. Someone knocked on my door, causing me to jump. I cursed under my breath, pushing myself up on my elbows. 2 girls were peeking around my doorframe. Foolishly, I had left it wide open, forgetting the old college rule, only leave your door open if you want to make new friends. And I was not in the mood to make new friends. One of them, an Asian girl with choppy black hair, was grinning at me. The other stood a little further back, fingering a box of Marlboro Reds. "Hey," she said, nodding at me. Her voice was smooth and raspy at the same time. "Did you just move in?" I laid back down, rubbing my face with both hands, choosing not to bother with manners. "Yeah, about 5 seconds ago." "Cool." The girls walked in, evidently ignoring my very clear body language. The girl with the black hair ran her fingers along the edge of my desk, and then picked up a little ceramic duck from my unpacked box of trinkets. "Grandma," I explained, feeling strangely defensive. "Cute," she replied, holding it up to her face. "Has anyone told you yet?" the other girl asked abruptly, looking around my apartment. She had tucked the cigarettes into the back pocket of her jeans and was now tugging at her long red braids. "Jesus, Gianna, give her a second." "Well, she needs to know." "Yeah, but we haven't even asked her name." I blinked at the 2 strangers incredulously. I hadn't even had time to put toilet paper in my bathroom, and here they were, touching my things and talking about me like I wasn't there. I just wanted to take a nap, honestly. "My name's Arden," I said. The girl with the red braids, Gianna, sat down next to me on my bed. "Did they tell you?" "Tell me what?" "Oh, of course they didn't. The rules." I blinked again, my face blank. I didn't know about any rules besides the typical renting ones. I had signed the lease after, at best, skimming over it. The landlord was a skinny woman who smelled of ashes. and I was fairly certain she had never developed the facial muscles necessary for smiling. I wasn't about to ask her any follow-up questions, especially when the rent was so cheap. The other girl laughed nervously. "Where did you move here from?" I ignored her. "What rules?" Gianna got a strange, wicked sort of smile on her face, bouncing a little on my mattress. The other girl sighed loudly. "Something happens here every night," she began, pulling out my rickety office chair and sitting down. "Something weird." "Like what?" I sat up, frowning at her. Finally, my interest was piqued. "Someone walks down the street," Gianna said, her voice reminding me of a camp counselor telling a scary story around the bonfire. "That one, right down there." She pointed at my window. "It's someone different each night. They scream for help for about an hour, but we aren't supposed to help them." I just stared at her. I felt a small chill run up my spine. I didn't know what to make of all this. "It happens at a different time every night," the other one said softly. "We never know when it's coming." "Why?" She shrugged almost sadly. "We don't know why." I scoffed, leaning my elbows against my knees. "I don't believe you," the girl shrugged. "You don't have to. You'll see for yourself." The look in her eyes made me want to believe her. She seemed sincere, but I couldn't even begin to fathom what they were saying being true. It was too strange, no, too outlandish. I knew this wouldn't be the nicest neighborhood, but it couldn't be that bad. It had to be a prank. They had to be hazing me or something. "We'll come back later," Gianna said matter-of-factly. "We'll show you." Before I could protest, she grabbed the other girl by the wrist, and they were gone. I followed them to the door, watching them march down the hall, talking to each other in hushed voices. I closed my door behind them. That night, as promised, they came back. They came dragging along two boys. One was somewhat muscular, wearing a tight black t-shirt and baggy jeans, and my eyes were instantly drawn to a silver heart-shaped locket around his neck. He smiled at me and introduced himself as Will when he walked in. The other boy was smaller but chubbier and nervous-looking, with a buzz cut and ill-fitting cargo shorts. His name, I was told, was Matteo. The girl named Gianna came in carrying a bottle of wine and that same slightly crumpled box of cigarettes. The other one, the girl I still didn't know the name of, was the only one who looked even somewhat apologetic. They all sat down on my dusty floor, next to the window, and motioned for me to join them. I sat between Will and the nameless girl, unsure whether I should continue feeling violated or if I should just give in to my strange, pushy neighbors. "Do you all live in this building?" I asked, hesitantly accepting the wine when it was passed to me. "Yeah," Will answered with a grin. It seemed half-hearted. "This building is where all the young people live." "It's where they put us," Gianna cut in, lighting a cigarette. It didn't even occur to me to tell her not to smoke inside. "We've all been sorted out. Forgive her. She's a bit of a conspiracy theorist." "It's not a theory," she snapped, glaring at him. "Look at the other ones. Next door, the middle-agers. People with kids, but no grandkids. Across the street, old people. Not a single 20-something in that entire building. May, tell him." So her name was May. I looked her over, admiring her smoky eye makeup and how she'd tied her hair up, long strands poking out like exploding fireworks. "Stop it," May muttered, reaching for the wine bottle. "You'll scare her." "I'm not scared." She just shrugged at me, as if she didn't believe me. We passed the bottle around and then around again. I listened to them bicker and laugh. It was clear they'd all been friends for a while, and I felt a little bit like I was intruding, even though they were in my apartment. Will asked me if I had gone to college, and I told him I did, but I dropped out. They all nodded sympathetically, which made me feel stupid. By midnight, I was a little bit buzzed, and my guard was beginning to fall. I had to admit it felt good to have friends. I had already mentally resigned myself to a life of solitude, at least for a while, but it seemed that might not actually have to be my fate. I laughed at Matteo and Gianna's drunken argument, passing a cigarette back and forth with May, blowing the smoke out of my open window. I had almost completely forgotten why they were all over when it happened. All at once, a blaring alarm came from each of our phones, like an Amber Alert. I could hear the sound echo throughout the neighborhood, like an entire chorus of hundreds of phones going off, not just ours. I nearly leapt out of my skin. Not even Gianna laughed. All of them went quiet and they looked at me as I took it out, frowning at the screen. "Do not interfere." "It's coming," Will whispered. He had changed, his eyes almost glassy and his voice soft and shaky. Mateo squeezed his shoulder. I looked at May. Her eyebrows were cinched together in concern, and she was stubbing out our cigarette against the windowsill, shrinking away. There it was again, that chill. It crept up my back, spreading along my scalp and making me shiver. Something felt deeply, deeply wrong. The others were quiet now, staring silently at the window I was sitting up against. The air felt somehow warmer, like it was buzzing with something. Or maybe I was just sweating. We sat there unmoving for what felt like half an hour. Right as I was getting tempted to ask what was going on, I heard it. It was far away and faint, but I still heard it. A cry. It continued as it got gradually closer, louder, more desperate. "Help! Please, my God! Someone help me!" Slowly, I leaned out the window. I had to see it with my eyes, had to confirm there was actually someone out there, like they had said there would be. My new apartment was on the 4th floor, so it was hard to see who was down on the street without squinting. In the flickering streetlights, I could make out the outline of an elderly man. He was hunched over, wandering aimlessly from door to door, wearing only what looked like a hospital gown to cover his pale, broken body. Behind him trailed a path of dripping blood, although I couldn't see where it was coming from. "Please, I'm hurt." I looked back at the others, my mouth hanging open. "What is this?" I demanded loudly. "What the hell is this?" May touched my arm, trying to calm me down. I pulled away from her. "Arden, please. We have to help him. Why can't we help him? He's just an old man." "We can't help him. Trust me." I ignored her, leaning further out the window, prepared to call out to him. Before I could open my mouth, I froze. The man down there was still now, facing our building. His head was tilted upwards, and I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew he was looking right at me. I immediately felt cold, like I was plummeting into ice water. "Help me," he whimpered into the silent night air, his voice barely audible. Then he began to scream. That scream wasn't human, or at least not any human I had ever met. It was desperate, agonized. It made my stomach turn and my eyes prick with tears. I couldn't look away. The blood was coming from his arms. Or, I should say, his lack of arms. Where his arms should have been, there were only bloody, mangled stumps. They looked fresh. He didn't move other than a shaky sway, and his eyes didn't leave me. His shriek slowly molded into words that I could just barely understand. "Please, please, please, please." May yanked me backwards, away from the window. I landed on my ass and yelped in pain and horror. "What is that thing?" I whispered. I didn't mean to whisper, but that was all that came out. "We don't know," May replied, her eyes trained on Will, who was crying now. Mateo held on to him like he might topple over. "We just know to follow the rules." "What happens if you don't follow the rules?" I asked, and immediately regretted it. Will sobbed softly. Outside, the old man wailed. Jana reached over and pulled the window shut, but it somehow did nothing to muffle the blood-curdling sound. "Do you want to tell her, or should I?" Mateo asked Will. Will just shook his head. He was clutching his locket now, turning the little heart over between his fingers. Mateo sighed and turned towards me. "A couple of months ago, one of them got to Will's girl." "Shannon," Jana butted in. "Her name was Shannon. Is. Sorry, her name is Shannon." I swallowed, but whatever I did, nothing would force down the lump in my throat. "What happened?" Mateo shook his head. "We don't know. We were all together when the screaming started. Usually we just ignore it now, you know? No use in dwelling on it. But that night we think she saw something different. She started insisting she had to help, and she ran outside. We couldn't stop her." He paused, glancing over at Will. He was silent and still. The screaming outside had begun to pass, getting softer as it continued further down the street. "Then what?" He shrugged. "Nothing. She was just gone." I pressed my lips together, trying to process all of this. I really had believed they were messing with me, but I had seen it. I had witnessed it firsthand, and it terrified me. "Why doesn't anyone leave?" He shrugged for a second time. "Can't afford it. Or people just don't care. Some people have left. But we all signed an NDA with the lease, so nobody ever knows." I frowned, thinking back to signing the paperwork, trying to remember. I could vaguely picture what he was talking about. I had just assumed it was more legal jargon that I would never understand. Had I seriously signed a non-disclosure agreement without even noticing? After that, I told them I wanted to go to bed. I needed time to process all of this. They understood, and each one of them said goodbye before leaving me alone. As I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, for some strange reason, I thought of May's face when we had realized it was happening, how she'd put out the cigarette and backed away from the window. Eventually, I was able to drift off to sleep. The next few weeks were difficult. I spent more and more time with my new neighbors. I came to find that they were right. I didn't think there was a single person older than 30 in our entire building, but I saw them all the time leaving the one next door. Settling in was difficult. The others seemed so used to it. They cared, of course. It scared them, especially Will. But you could tell they had been here a while by the way they sighed, closing the blinds and focusing harder on whatever they were doing. Eventually, I began to mimic them. It helped a little bit to pretend it was normal, as strange as that sounds. Moving out wasn't really an option for me anyways. I was a college dropout, and I hadn't found a job yet. I was still just getting by on what I had managed to save up. Every night, it was someone different. Some were more human, some seemed less. Some were drenched in blood, their clothes ripped and strange, but some looked fairly normal. The worst were the children. They would run like injured chickens, screeching and banging on doors, begging for help. Sometimes they would try different things, say different things, like they're coming, like I don't want to die, or even I'm sorry. There were a lot of children. One night while I was half awake, an alarm went off. It wasn't like the one on our phones, it was blaring, only somewhat muffled by my window. My apartment glowed a flashing red from outside. I didn't even look. I was too scared of what I might see. I just covered my head with my pillow and tried to fall back asleep. I came to learn all of the theories, especially from Gianna. She thought we had all been chosen and predetermined to live here, all for some sick little government game. She thought maybe there were people betting on the different buildings, putting down money on who would interfere the least. See that? She said to me one day in the hallway, returning from a coffee run. Cameras everywhere. I didn't know if I believed her. I spent time with May mostly. We smoked on the front steps and people watched. It was strange to see what at night was such a sinister and gruesome neighborhood during the day, bright and lively. She didn't talk much about the rules, so I didn't either. We didn't talk all that much in general, I found, just enjoying each other's company. Right when I was beginning to feel comfortable was when it happened. It started with a birthday cake. Happy birthday! As May walked through the door, Mateo blew into his plastic party horn. The paper inflated, smacking Will on the side of the head. May's hand flew to her heart. You know I hate surprises. Gianna laughed and walked over to her. In her hands, she held a chocolate cake, haphazardly adorned with sprinkles and bright pink icing that read, Happy Birthday, May, in the center. 24. She set down the cake on the dresser and threw her arm around May's neck. How does it feel? That's the spirit. Enough of this, Mateo cut in, weaving between them. Let's eat some cake, then let's go. Their tradition, I had learned, was to bar hop for birthdays. They told me there was no curfew here, despite the rules, just a recommended time to be home, which was 10:30 p.m. Usually, they said, they got home before the alarm or spent the night somewhere else. We all took some cake. The boys took shots in the kitchen to pre-game, while I watched Gianna fuss over May's hair. I was never much of a partier. While at clubs or bars in college, I spent most of the time out back, chatting with the smokers. But then again, I was never much of a friend group person either, so maybe the circumstances were changing. I watched them all troop outside to Mateo's car. I stuffed myself in the back, incredibly conscious of how close I was pressed into May. My other shoulder rammed into the car door. Mateo's music, cranked up to maximum volume, hurt my ears, and the tiny space was packed with the smell of tobacco and various perfumes as we sped down the freeway toward the city. But it was nice. It was really nice. I found myself laughing with them, and I hooked my arm around May's when she weaseled her hand beneath my elbow. It was actually nice. As predicted, the bars they chose weren't exactly my scene. But this time, as opposed to college, I could stand it. I took shots, I followed them out for smoke breaks. I even danced under the low purple lights until my feet ached inside my chunky heels, surely riddled with blisters. By the time we got to our third bar, I couldn't even feel it anymore. And it was at that third bar that we crammed ourselves into an old photo booth, and Gianna reluctantly offered $5 to the slot, and we laughed, red-faced, into a tiny camera. After the photos spit out into the compartment, the others slid through the red curtains, but before I could follow, May grabbed my wrist. She held me back, sliding her long, baby blue nails up my wrist. I shivered. "You never gave me a birthday present," she whispered, and I could feel her breath on my face. If I was wearing my glasses, they would have been fogging up. Yeah, well, I didn't get to finish my quip before she kissed me. It was nice. And then it wasn't. "Hey," Will called out to me, squeezing through a crowd of men wearing tattered leather jackets to get to me. "Arden, where's everybody else?" I blinked, looking around. I could have sworn they had been right there a second ago, but now none of them were anywhere to be found. I shrugged. "Dunno. Why? What's up?" He finally broke free from the swaying mass, and I got a better look at him. He looked worried. His face was flushed, and I could see a few drops of sweat creeping out from his hairline. He took his phone out of his pocket and held it out to me. First, I saw his home screen. It was him next to a girl with strawberry blonde hair, both clutching beer bottles and grinning widely at the camera. Then I looked where he actually wanted me to. The time, 1:47 a.m. "It's getting late," he narrated. "Can we find the others and get going?" I understood then. He was worried. It was past 1 a.m. and no alarm yet. It was later than usual. The bars would start closing soon. He wanted to get back before it happened. Will and I weaved through the crowd. I was pretty buzzed, and I realized I was having a hard time moving my feet right, which made me feel embarrassed. I hadn't even had that much to drink. Was I that much of a lightweight? We found them outside, chain smoking. Will explained the situation while I swayed. The drive back was strangely tense. Mateo's music was turned down, and there wasn't any joking or boisterous gossiping like there had been on the way out. We all felt it. It didn't need to be said. Something was off. Will drove fast, almost reckless. In the dark, May took my hand. Just as he was careening around the last corner, and we could almost make out the shape of our apartment building down the street, it happened. All of our phones went off at once. Jana let out a small shriek from the other side of the back seat. "Do not interfere." Mateo turned back towards us, pressing his finger to his lips. Had this ever happened before? By their reactions, I didn't think so. It was different when it came when I was in my bedroom, when I could just shut the curtains and put my headphones on. I felt so small and helpless then, like I was gazing into the maw of something incomprehensibly beyond my understanding. I felt like we were all flies, and this neighborhood right now was the spider's web. Will drove slowly now, maybe 5 miles an hour. We were all still. We were all silent. Not even a stray breath cut through the quiet. Underneath the glowing streetlights, I could make out the side of Will's face. He was pale, and if I hadn't seen his knee shifting as he pressed down on the brakes, I could have mistaken him for a mannequin. The car came to a stop. I followed his gaze, all the way down the street to the dark horizon, and I saw what he saw, a silhouette. It was far too distant to make out what shape it took, but it was evidently humanoid. It moved in a shaky stumble, limping down the middle of the road in our direction, and in the overwhelming silence I could hear it, far away but still deeply urgent. "Help me! Will!" Jana hissed. "Turn the car around." Will didn't move. He just stared forward, as white as paper. It didn't make any logical sense, but I knew what he knew. It was too late now. There was no use. "Help me! Please help!" I could tell now that it was a girl from its voice and its figure as it got closer. It was wearing some sort of white nightgown, not unlike the old man's hospital attire from that first night, stained with dark red blood. From here, I couldn't tell if it was fresh or dry. I didn't know why that mattered to me. "Maybe," May whispered. Her arms shook against mine. "Maybe if we're quiet and we duck down, it won't see us." Deep down, it felt as hopeless as turning around had felt, but it seemed reasonable. I nodded and did as she suggested, crouching behind the passenger seat, my knees throbbing from the strange angle I'd bent myself into. We all did it, except for Will. He didn't move. He still just looked. When he finally spoke, I could barely hear him. It was so weak. "Shannon!" The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Mateo was the one to break the silence. "What?" "Shannon," he repeated, finally turning to look at his friend. "That's Shannon." I peered over the seat in front of me, squinting my eyes. The human-like thing was getting closer, and now I could make out strawberry blonde hair, round face, short legs. The girl from Will's phone lock screen, the girl who had disappeared. Shannon. May gasped next to me. "Dude," Mateo said slowly, his words crumbling as soon as they left his mouth. "I know what you're thinking, dude. Do not get out of this car." Will didn't even seem like he was with us anymore. He was in shock, I think, looking back. "I have to help her," he insisted, right as another sickening cry rang out. "Help me! Help! Help me, please! Someone! It hurts!" It was getting far too close to us for comfort, but it still didn't seem to notice the car. Its cries became more and more desperate as they got louder. "I have to help her," Will repeated, and a bit of life had returned to his face. Mateo shook his head and grabbed at his sleeve. "Will, that is not Shannon." Will glared at him, his eyes shining with tears. "I know Shannon. That's her. I know you do, dude, and I know you miss her. But please, please don't do this." Their voices were getting louder and more distraught, and I felt May press into my side, trembling like a leaf. Gianna was whimpering, but I couldn't see her from my position. The thing was almost to our car when it stopped. She turned her head, left, then right, almost like she was sniffing the air. The boys stopped arguing. I felt like my heart would burst out of my chest. I could see Shannon's face now, and I realized why she hadn't seen us. The girl's face was streaked with gore, and it looked like her eyes had been scooped out with a melon spoon. She cried, drool pouring from her slackened mouth, but no tears could come. It happened too quickly. None of us could stop him. Will violently ripped his arm away from Mateo, fumbling for the handle to the car door. Gianna screamed. Mateo tried to slam down on the lock, but he missed, and Will managed to get the door open before he could try again. He stumbled onto the asphalt and hit the ground with a soft crunch. The thing turned her head and began to scream. But instead of charging at Will, she backed away. She held her arms out in front of her like something might attack her, whipping her head around wildly. An alarm went off like the one I had heard that one night, but far more unbearable now that I was in it. The streetlights lining either side of the street switched to a flashing red, and Mateo threw himself into the driver's seat, the tires screeching as he peeled away. Gianna was screaming at him, pleading with him to go back. May was weeping into her hands. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I didn't understand. As we sped away, I looked back. I couldn't help it. I saw the flash of some sort of van in the blinding red light, pulling around the corner. Then nothing. That was a week or two ago. I don't know, I've been having a hard time keeping track of time. None of us have spoken much since that night. We tried the police, of course, but as you could assume, nothing came of it. I think whatever this is far larger than we know. I don't know if it's some kind of experiment or just a sick game, but I'm going to move back into my parents' house next week, despite all their berating, and then figure out what to do from there. I don't know if that was really Shannon that we saw that night, or if it was something else, and I don't know which is worse. All I know is that last night I heard Will's voice outside my window, crying. Story 4. I'm a realtor. Something is very wrong with the house I was showing today. Everything was clean, the AC was set to a comfortable temperature, I had finger foods out, chill music playing, and a candle going. I was still new and this was one of my first solo events, but I felt like I was ready. The house was cute. It was 1 story, 3 beds, 2 baths, a perfect starter home. It needed some updating, but it was nothing too crazy that the average DIYer couldn't handle. I was surprised at the time that the family had wanted to sell it all. They had only lived here for a short time. They had tried to distance themselves from the process as much as possible. They'd even refused to set foot in the home since they left. I was feeling good and had an hour to spare before the open house started and people started streaming in. To pass the time and calm my nerves, I decided to wander through the house as another last-minute refresher for any questions I'd get on the house itself. I walked around the kitchen, living room, stairs. Wait, I stopped so abruptly that I nearly tripped myself. This house was one story. There was no second floor visible from the outside, and these stairs were not here any of the times I'd been to this house. I was sure of it. The staircase looked like it fit with the house, and since staircases don't appear out of nowhere, I thought maybe I was so nervous that I was just losing my damn mind. I decided to check my paperwork to make sure I wasn't getting it mixed up with a different house I'd been to recently. It did confirm that this was a one-story. Maybe it was just an attic or crawl space, and I'd missed it before. There was a small landing with just a door at the top. I figured it'd be good to check it out in case I got questions about it. As I stepped through the door, it was like stepping back in time. I also felt pressure in my ears as if I were on an airplane making a landing. The upstairs had a musty smell to it. There was a small extra kitchen, another living room, a bathroom, a bedroom, and a locked room with a glass door, but a full-length curtain on the inside of the door obscured the interior from my view. I stopped to take it in, and the curtain seemed to flutter slightly, as if there was a slight breeze or something moving behind it. The bedroom had wallpaper consisting of ornate patterns and velvet flowers. I had never seen anything like it. This place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, but there was no dust or other signs of age-related wear. A sudden sound from around the corner made me jump. I followed the source. A radio had suddenly started playing in the living room. It made a sound as if it were in between stations. There was a soft lime green sofa and a TV that looked older than I was. Yeah, this place definitely was straight out of the 70s. The thing is, the house itself was built in the 90s. There was another odd curtained room off the living room too. It looked identical to the first, but this door was open, just a crack. I couldn't describe why, but it made me nervous. I suddenly noticed that despite it being only 6 p.m. in July, it was pitch black outside the windows up here. Something about this floor, besides it appearing out of nowhere, gave me a really weird feeling, despite the cheery colors. It felt like a thin veneer painted over something much, much darker. I decided I'd spent enough time up here and found myself thinking, I hope the upstairs disappears again by the time the guests arrive, which was a sentence I never imagined I'd find myself uttering. I rounded the corner back into the tiny kitchen, but it was different. Cabinets were open that had been closed, but worse, the door to the stairs was just gone. This top floor couldn't have been more than 1,000 square feet. There was no way I had just got lost. I decided to retrace my steps. Maybe I hadn't come in through the kitchen after all. I went back down the hall to the bedroom and bathroom. The curtained room was gone. I felt a raw, I know this doesn't make sense, but I don't know what to do about it, sort of panic. I leaned into the bedroom with the fuzzy wallpaper and noticed the curtained room was in the bedroom now, but the door was open more. I could hear some faint sound coming from behind it, and I knew that I didn't want to stick around for when that door opened all the way. I walked quickly back and stuck my head into the living room. The curtained room was gone, and the door to the stairs I had taken up here had yet to reappear. A new door had appeared, though, at the back of the kitchen. I debated and decided to open it. To my immense relief, there were stairs, but the more I looked, the more I realized it wasn't right. It was dark at the bottom, so dark that part of the stairs blended into and then disappeared into a blackness as velvety as the old wallpaper. These stairs also looked old, much, much older than the rest of the house appeared to be. Before I realized what I was doing, I had already walked down several steps. I had an inexplicable urge to continue downward. Something was down there that I needed. It was old, ancient maybe. It needed me too. I was here, and it had waited so long. It felt good to be needed. It felt right, descending into the darkness. Its elation was infectious. It vibrated through the air. No, elation isn't the right word. It was the yearning of something hollow, dangerous, looking to be full. It was needful. I was terrified. I knew something horrible was down there, and I kept continuing towards it against my will. In my mind, fear and self-preservation were fighting a losing battle against whatever it was down there that had its hooks in me, pulling me towards it. The air was electric with its excitement. My foot began to disappear into that horrid, beautiful, foreboding darkness. In the distance, a door opened and closed, shattering the silence. Someone was calling out. I blinked. It was a light in the darkness. The open house. In that moment, the connection between the thing in the darkness and myself was broken. I took advantage of the distraction and ran back up the stairs and slammed the door behind me. Someone was downstairs looking for me. I ran through the kitchenette, and the door to the stairs were back, the real stairs. I could have cried in relief but didn't dare blink or let anything obscure my vision, lest it disappeared again. The curtain door had also moved again, so that it was right next to the door to the stairs. The door opened toward the back hall so that I could look inside from where I was standing. It was halfway open this time. My instincts told me, do not look in there. Don't. Look. I reached for the handle of the door to downstairs. A soft crying was coming from the curtained room. It was alien, unlike anything I had heard before. It was not a mournful sound. Don't look. My hand tightened on the handle, and I heard the cry become louder, closer to the entrance of the partially open door. It was coming. I opened, spun around, and closed the door and darted down the stairs. I looked over my shoulder, but nothing had followed me. Someone had shown up early, and I must have made a terrible first impression as I came flying down the stairs, sweaty, eyes wide with terror. I tried to get myself together and think of some way to explain my terrible state, but before I could even figure out what to say, he gestured to my ears. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I gingerly touched first one and then the other, and sure enough, a small trickle of blood was leaking from each one. I hadn't even noticed it, but it had been dripping down, staining the collar of my blazer. I managed to collect myself a bit before the rest of the potential buyers came filing in and let my hair down to hide the bloodstains. The rest of the night was a blur, honestly. I was on edge, ready to leave and lock myself in my apartment and sleep with all of the lights on. I was never going in a dark room again. I could barely focus. I hoped more than I'd ever hoped for anything before, that no one would go up the stairs or make me go up there again. The stairs were still there, but not a single guest approached them, asked me about them, or even looked at them. They walked around them like there was an invisible obstacle there. For a while, as I nodded and answered questions robotically, I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. Was I losing my grip on reality? The only thing that confirmed to me that I hadn't had some sort of waking nightmare was when the first guest stopped me on his way out. He told me to take care, that it was going to be okay, and I almost hugged him. I think he saved my life by giving me some sort of anchor to reality. He took one last look at me and then very clearly stared up at the door at the top of the stairs for quite a while. That was one of the weirdest and scariest things I've experienced, but that's not even the worst part. When I got back home, I noticed something in the hallway of my apartment, a door that had never been there before, made of glass with a curtain obscuring the view from the inside. It was only open a crack, but it was enough for me to hear that sound, like a failed attempt at mimicking a crying child, echoing down the empty,